What is up, y'all? I wanted to spend some time talking through my Arena Cube in detail. Now, first things first, if you are watching this on YouTube, you will realize that you can see me. If you are listening to this as a podcast, there is a video element that I am uploading to YouTube. The reason for that is because I'm going to talk through a lot of cards today, and I don't want to read the rules text to every single card I talk about. So I'm just going to plan to show the cards, hover over them. If you're pretty familiar with all the cards in Magic, like I am, you can absolutely listen to this as audio. I mean it to be listenable for audio only. But I thought it might be fun to make a YouTube video for this because I'm really excited to talk about it. So I've kind of offhanded mentioned the few months on my podcast that I have this Arena Cube. It's something that I've put a lot of work into over the past summer, kind of the past couple months, for a couple reasons. One is that it's fun, of course. Two is that it was selected for CubeCon. Lords of the Limited had a guest pick for one of the cubes for CubeCon in Madison next month, and they selected my cube. So I've been drafting it a lot, thinking about it a lot, kind of tuning the list ahead of CubeCon submissions, which was this past Wednesday. So I locked in the list last weekend, and I'm really proud of the work that I put into this. I feel like it's in a really good place. I feel like it's really fun to draft. It really achieved the goals well. I plan on not making any changes to the list over the past month until CubeCon. So I feel like this is a very good stopping point for this cube for now. And a great opportunity to talk through the choices that I've made in this cube, sort of what the vibe is, talk about a lot of the individual cards and synergies, really go into detail. A couple other reasons I've been thinking a lot about my cube. One is that with the podcast, I sort of cobbled together a bunch of folks online in a Discord server, and we've been drafting it once or twice a week, which has been really fun. Drafting it on Draftmancer, just like LSV does in his videos, and then playing the games out on Arena. And also we've gotten 3 Arena anthologies in the past couple weeks, which have a lot of banger cube staples, like Currency Converter or Flicker Wisp was in the last one, which is a great cube card. So there's been some really exciting additions to the Arena client that I've been really into for my cube. I also want to say before we start that I think this episode's going to run pretty long. I'm doing this as a bonus episode. It's not going to be I'm considering it like a main episode. I'm not taking a week to do this. I have a lot of built up passion for this project, a lot of pent up thoughts that I have about this after spending quite a bit of mental energy over the past summer working on this. So I'm kind of making this video for me. I know that people just like hearing people who are passionate about something talk about it. So I'm putting this out there into the world. I'm sure a lot of people will find this fun, but I think it will run a little long, just warning you. And it's not really related to my other content. So this is just something I'm kind of doing for me for fun. So let's dive in. What is this cube all about? I would say that the sort of headliner tag for this cube is that it's a balance of power and synergy. So what I mean by that is that there are a lot of powerful cards. I would describe it as power forward, power motivated. So you can see here, there's a bunch of power outliers like Ocelot Pride, Ragavan, Reanimate, Ancient Tomb. But I would not describe this as power maxed. My goal is not to play the most powerful cards on Arena. I've left off cards like a Johnny I cut for being too strong, Psychic Frog, cards like Minsk and Boo, Sneak Attack. You could technically play Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation on Arena. These are not in my cube. The other portion of this that I really like is the synergy aspect. And I find that putting too many power outliers in my cube kind of overshadow the more nuanced synergy aspects, which I'll get into later in this video. That's going to include stuff like the discard package, the sacrifice package, a whole bunch of different synergies. I think that making a power maxed arena cube is pretty interesting. I even think that might be pretty fun. That's really just not what I'm doing here. So you will see a lot of powerful cards. You won't see the most powerful cards. And I really like the power level where this is at. Like, you get to play with exciting, powerful cards, especially like exciting, powerful old cards that they put on the client, like Reanimate. But it's not like balls to the wall power level like a vintage cube. One other reason for that is that when you have too many power outliers, a lot of the drafting decisions become less interesting. Like this left column here, the Ancient Tomb, Ocelot Pride, Reanimate, Ragavan, and also like Felia. These are cards that you are going to take pack one, pick one out of most packs, but I've kind of limited the number of cards like that. So there's definitely a lot of power outliers, a lot of like Windmill Slam pack one, pick ones, but just like not the most. I was really sick of like Psychic Frog or a Johnny being like really like, you have to take this out of every pack. In terms of the creative direction and sort of the synergy aspect, I draw a lot of inspiration from Aspiring Spike, who is a Modern streamer. He streams Magic Online Modern almost every weekday. It happens to line up with my work schedule. Like I tend to watch him a lot while I'm working, like have him on in the background. His whole thing is that he does like Modern brews, like he brews new decks in Modern, but his decks are not like crazy Rube Goldberg machines. His ethos for his brewing process is very much, we're going to maximize certain ideas by just playing the best cards. A good example recently, which maybe is not the best example, but he was really high on Quantum Riddler going into Edge of Eternities, and that has now kind of established itself as a staple of Modern on some level. But he was really into maximizing that with Felia, with Ephemerate, and he's not afraid to play cards like Solitude in that deck, and Felia is just like a great Magic card, like a busted Modern staple. So he's not afraid to like sort of maximize these new cards with these really powerful staples. And that's the kind of vibe that I'm going for in my cube. There's going to be a lot of powerful individual outliers. There's going to be these synergy pieces, and ideally you are maximizing these synergy pieces with the powerful cards. So I've pulled out up here, there's this discard theme in my cube, and there's a card like Monument to Endurance, which does stone nothing unless you have other cards in your deck that can discard cards. But luckily, the cards that we have available to us that actually discard cards are just good cards. There's cards like Faithless Looting, there's cards like Seasoned Pyromancer, which is another Modern staple, or Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. This is another card that's just like very strong on its own. And you can use these cards to maximize the power of a card like Monument to Endurance, which is really a strict build around. It does nothing on its own. You're just building good cards that maximize other sort of dependent cards. Another example of a synergy package is the Black Sacrifice cards. And you'll notice here that I have Priest of Forgotten Gods. This is a card that you really need other token fodder to maximize. I love this card. I think this card's really strong. A class of cards which are not in my cube are Blood Artist effects. This type of card that's like this small creature, maybe something like Zulapart Cutthroat or Bastion of Remembrance is another card that's in a lot of cubes with sacrifice themes. Blood Artist is actually not in my cube because I think that it doesn't do enough on its own. Like, Blood Artist is a very powerful effect if you build around it, but it's just so weak on its own. It dies really easily, which is how it compares to like Monument to Endurance. Like, I think Blood Artist is really below rate. And we've gotten a couple of good Blood Artist effects on more reasonable creatures lately, like Marionette Apprentice or Sephiroth, which I'll talk about the sacrifice theme later. But I would much rather use those cards to enable the sacrifice theme. And additionally, the way that this plays out in my cube is that this Aristocrats theme, this sacrifice theme, is more likely going to be in black-white than black-red. And black-red is usually the more traditional sacrifice deck. The white cards just give you tokens, which are really good sack fodder to sacrifice to your black sacrifice outlets. Like, red doesn't really give you a lot of tokens. Like, a lot of the red token generators, like cards that make goblins, are just a little bit underpowered for this environment. But cards like Ocelot Pride, that's a card that makes a bunch of tokens. This fits really naturally into a deck that wants to play Priest of Forgotten Gods, or maybe something like Toby or Blade Splicer, where you can sacrifice the 1/1. So hopefully that was a good explanation of the sort of vibe of power and synergy that I'm going for in this cube. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the mana. So I have 2 copies of each fetch land and 2 copies of each shock land in the cube. The mana is rounded out with 1 surveil land per color pair, 1 creature land per color pair, and 1 fast land per color pair. This idea of breaking singleton for fetch lands and shock lands, I've heard it referred to as the Baltimore singleton type of cubes. I think that was popularized by Lucky Paper, the Cube podcast, who are based in Baltimore. The reason why you would want to do double fetch land, double shock land, in my opinion, the way I like to describe this is fetch lands are a very, very unique card type, and only having a single cycle in a 540 card cube really limits the synergies that you can get out of a shock land. Fetch lands are so strong and so unique that if you only have a single cycle of 10, like that's in the vintage cube, they end up being a little bit like power, where like the power 9 in vintage, like stuff like Mox Ruby or Black Lotus, where you're kind of at the mercy of where you open them. Like if you open a fetch land in vintage cube, you're going to take that over most things except the absolutely tip top of like the power outliers. And I don't really like that vibe of forcing players to make those picks of fetch lands super early. I find the sweet spot is 2 fetch lands in a 540 card cube. That averages about to 2 to 3 per drafter based on how many cards we open. And fetch lands also unlock a lot of synergies that you can only get with fetch lands. So the most obvious synergies are landfall synergies, which a card like Scythecat Cub or Bristly Bill, these are like cheap green creatures with really strong landfall abilities. The green landfall stuff is so much stronger with fetch lands, and I think that's a pretty cool synergy to enable. And it's really just not possible if you're only doing 1 cycle of fetch lands. There's also stuff like Brainstorm, like putting cards back and shuffling them with your fetch lands. That's something that makes Brainstorm a lot better, which is really cool. Treasure Cruise and Delve spells. Fatal Push gets a lot better with double fetch lands. And then a card like Deathrite Shaman, which like you can't really play this in any Magic format where you can't really play it because it's banned in a lot of places. But this card becomes like very, very strong with double fetch lands. And I think that's really cool because it's a very unique place to play this card. The concern with double fetch land, double shock land is that it makes the mana too good. And I think that the official Arena Cube definitely has this problem. They have triple fetch land, double shock land, so even more fetches. And I think it really verges into the territory of being like, you're just going to take a bunch of fetch lands, you're going to play 3, 4, 5 colors, and you're just going to take the strongest cards. And that really works against the synergy packages that I'm trying to seed into my cube. So it's definitely at odds here. The upside of fetch lands enabling really good synergies and also making the mana pretty good. And then the downside of it maybe making the mana too good. And I wrestled for this for a while, and we were drafting it online a couple times a week this summer. And I was noticing that it was veering into the mana being too good, which I was really concerned about because I really didn't want to drop down to only 1 cycle of fetch lands or remove fetches altogether. And I did some thinking, I had some discussions with people, and the conclusion that I came to that I tried out was that the problem wasn't necessarily double fetch lands. It was actually the triomes that were the issue here. So the triomes really, like you look at this card like Zagoth Triome and you say, oh, this is a Sultai land. It goes in a Sultai deck. Like maybe there's a black blue or a black green deck that's splashing like some blue cards. I'll play this Zagoth Triome. But the issue is when you can fetch triomes, they really subsidize not a 3-color deck or a 2-color deck with a single splash. They really subsidize like 4 to 5 color piles. And I think that is really unhealthy for most cube environments. And I really just don't think that the triomes add a lot to the mana in a cube that has fetch lands in it. They're just so strong at enabling playing a lot of colors. Additionally, I ended up cutting a couple of multicolor power outliers, just kind of like toning down the power of the gold cards a little bit. So 2 cards specifically that I cut were Atraxa Grand Unifier and Omnath Locus of Creation. These are 2 cards that require you to play a lot of colors. Atraxa is a pretty cool reanimation target. There is reanimation in my cube, which I'll go into detail later. But Atraxa was just a card that people were taking early, and they were building these 4 to 5 color green decks and just hard casting it, and it was really strong. So I ended up doing a change where I cut all the triomes. I added the fast lands back in, which are really lands that you really only want if you're playing like 2 colors or maybe 2 and a splash, or maybe 3 colors, which I think 3 color decks are fine. And cut some of the more powerful gold cards like Omnath and Atraxa. The issue went away almost immediately. Like we had 2-3 drafts in a row where green soup trophied. Like people were really catching on to like just take a bunch of fetch lands and play the most powerful cards, and it was doing really well. And that ended almost immediately. The next couple drafts and beyond were all won by 2 color decks or even monocolor decks, which is another thing you can absolutely do in this cube. I still like splashing. I still like multicolor decks. I found that after cutting triomes, the multicolor decks look a lot more like they'll be like mono green decks that are splashing individual cards of other colors, which I think is a lot healthier for the format. So now that I've given a pretty long overview of what this cube is doing, I'm going to go through each of the individual colors, talk about its power outliers, talk about what sort of synergies it has going around, what specific build arounds are in there. A lot of cubes have prescriptive 2-color archetypes, like a traditional draft format. Like they'll be like blue-white is flyers, blue-black is control, stuff like that. A lot of other cubes, especially cubes of this size, my cube is 540 cards, don't really have like prescriptive 2-color archetypes for each of the color pairs. There are more like macro archetypes, like blue can play tempo, blue can play control, and it's much more tied to the individual colors. So it's kind of like I have a white aggro deck, what does blue add to it? Which leads to a lot of deck variety, which is one of the points of building a 540 card cube, like a larger cube size, as opposed to 360, where every single card gets drafted at an 8-player table. So you can see this column here. I have a bunch of blue and white cards, and the deck that plays Adeline is a lot different than a deck that would play like Spyglass Siren, like a blue tempo deck, which is also different than a blue-white deck that might play Day of Judgment, which is different from a blue-white deck that maybe is an artifact deck and plays Urza, or a blue-white deck that leans into Blink and has like Ephemerate and stuff. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can build each color pair, and it's way more about what individual cards you're trying to maximize. All right, I'm going to start off just going in Wooburg order, talking about white cards first. The way I'm going to structure each of these sections, I'm going to go through what I think the power outliers are. You can think of power outliers roughly as I would think about taking this over a fetch land early in the draft. Like I said, I did deprioritize fetch lands with the double cycle, but they're still really strong. You're taking them early over a lot of cards. Then I'm going to go into sort of what each color's archetypes loosely are, and then go into the individual build-arounds. So starting with white, just going to read out some power outliers. Obviously, Swords to Plowshares is a fantastic magic card. Ocelot Pride should be no surprise. Felia, Mother of Runes, Solitude. These are classic cube staples. Reprieve, I think, is in this category. I think that card is very, very strong for white aggressive decks. A couple of surprises. You have Overlord of the Mistmoors and Elspeth Stormslayer. These 2 cards, I think, are a little bit underrated. They don't look like your traditional cube power outliers because they cost 7 or 4 and 5 mana. But these cards have a really outsized impact on the game, and I just find that I win a lot of games, or people win a lot of games when they put these in their decks. They've really impressed me over the past couple months, so I would not sleep on these. Also, Wandering Emperor I would throw in here too as a power outlier. I think this card's really strong, also really fun to play in my opinion. If you can combo it with Felia, you can activate its ability every turn. that you can flicker it with Felia, or you can activate it twice in a turn, which I think is really cool too. White's archetypes. Obviously, white has a classic aggro deck, got a bunch of 1/1 or 2/1s, like a bunch of Savannah Lions, like Usher the Fallen. It's got like classic white aggro staples like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and more classic aggro staples like Adeline. Really not too much to say here. If you've ever drafted mono white in Vintage Cube, it looks a lot like this. Usually close to mono white because you want to play a lot of white 1-drops, but you could throw in like blue or red as a secondary color too. There's also a lot of control staples. Day of Judgment, Sunfall, a couple of white Wraths that are really good. Also Supreme Verdict in blue-white. And some good white control tools, like something like Oust is a really good tool for a white deck. Or another card, Condemn, which puts a target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. White has good control tools as well. You can build traditional blue-white control. There's a little bit of a blink theme. Cards like Ephemerate are in here that are really good with Solitude and the other pitch elementals, as well as just value creatures like Blade Splicer. Recent edition, we got Flicker Wisp, which is a really strong card too. Flicker Wisp in particular can reset or scam in like your Overlord of the Mistmoors. Like if you impend your Overlord for 4, you can Flicker Wisp and have the actual creature. That's a really strong play pattern. Flicker Wisp was one we got in the Arena Anthology recently and was a card I was really excited for. So I think this one is good too. The Blink stuff isn't a full deck. It's just something your deck could care about. In terms of build-arounds for white, one of the biggest ones is there are a lot of equipment spells in the cube because we have Stoneforge Mystic, as well as Cloud as a recent addition, the 2-mana Cloud from Final Fantasy. And previously, you were just getting value equipment. So a card like Barbed Spike. This is actually, I think it's a quite strong spell. I really like this card. This was like just a totally fine creature to tutor off your Stoneforge Mystic or your Cloud. And also more powerful stuff like Cryptic Coat. Cryptic Coat in particular is really fun with Stoneforge Mystic because you can flash in the Cryptic Coat and then bounce it back to your hand at instant speed. So you can make a 2/2 for 4 mana at instant speed, which doesn't sound like a good rate, but doing it as an instant is really strong. But recently with one of the Arena Anthologies, we got Batterskull and Cauldron Complete. Now, these are cards you can tutor off both Stoneforge and Cloud. They don't really work with Cloud because usually the name of the game with Stoneforge is that you're cheating these cards into play. So Cauldron is more of a card for Stoneforge, but Batterskull is definitely a strong tutor target no matter what. I'm really excited to play with these more. There are a couple cards that care about 1-drops. So we have Ranger Captain of Eos as a card that can tutor 1-drops, so you can build a little 1-drop tutor package. There's also Bright Glass Gear Hulk in green-white, which I think is actually a really strong card, a little bit slept on. This one can also get artifacts and enchantments, so you can get something like Portable Hole as a removal spell off this, which I think is really nice. White kind of cares about artifacts. Your white deck could care about artifacts. I find that if you are playing Stoneforge Mystic in your deck and cards like Barbed Spike, you have enough artifacts to put in some of the artifact theme cards. So Michiko's Reign of Truth is a card that I really like in aggro decks. And especially if you have cards like Ginger Brute or Barbed Spike that are evasive. A couple more build-arounds to round it out. You have cards that care about tokens. So this includes Elspeth Stormslayer. This doubles all of your tokens that you make. Obviously, that's really good with token makers. But a couple other cards that care about tokens are Staff of the Storyteller and Caretaker's Talent. Both these cards, I think, are quite strong. I really like building around Caretaker's Talent. The Overrun mode on Chapter 3, I think, is really fun. And just like drawing cards is fun too. And these cards both fit well into aggressive decks and probably more like mid-range decks. So I think both of these cards are quite strong and really fun to build around. All right, moving on to blue cards. I think that white is really straightforward in what it does. You're going to be like an aggressive or a mid-range deck most of the time. Sometimes you'll be control. Blue is really scattered in what it cares about. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Blue has a lot of just really generically good cards, and there are a lot of different ways that you can take blue in my cube. Just to run through some of the power outliers, Tameo, Inquisitive Student for Modern Horizons 3. This card's just great. Definitely one of the strongest cards in the cube. Some other creatures, Subtlety is really strong. Urza, obviously, just you can build around artifacts. I think Urza is really good if you maximize it. Quantum Riddler is a recent addition that I think is really strong. Just a strong card on rate. Goes into basically every blue deck. Hard to cut it. I think it's just a good card. And then blue gets a lot of really good spells. Surprise, surprise. You have this trio of counter spells in Mana Leak, Remand, and Counterspell. I would throw in Memory Lapse too, put it on top of your opponent's library as another power outlier counterspell on the level of these cards. Maybe a notch better than Counterspell, honestly. And then some more expensive spells instance. So you have Cryptic Command, which I think is really strong with a couple specific cards and builds, which I'll get into in a second. You really need to be almost mono blue to play Cryptic Command, but I think the reward is worth it. And I think because blue often wants to be really heavy blue, I think that Lorien Revealed, the Land Cycler, is really strong in blue as well. I would put this in the upper echelon, is one of the best. I think it and Troll, which we'll talk about in black later, are the best land cyclers by quite a bit. And also Mystic Confluence, I would put close to Cryptic Command's level. I think that Cryptic Command's probably a little better, but Mystic Confluence requires a lot less deck building. As far as, like I said, blue is often just a mid-range deck. You can play just a generic blue-black good cards mid-range deck. I do like to lean into synergy in the cube, but there's good stuff decks. And I think blue-black is one of those often built like that. So cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor, Jace the Mind Sculptor works really well if you have, if you're playing creatures. If you can stabilize the board and slam a Jace, you can pull really far ahead. I think that's often what blue wants to do. And it's actually interesting. I think blue gets that better out of a second color than its own creatures, because I think its creatures lean way more into tempo. So there's a lot of evasive threats at 2 mana, like Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel or Mischievous Mystic. There's a lot of cheap looters in blue. It's so hard to pick which 2-drop evasive threats you play in 2025, because we've just gotten so many good ones over the past couple of years. Artifacts are centered in blue. Artifacts was a really recent addition to my cube. We got Mox Opal and a couple other Artifacts Matter cards in one of the Arena anthologies over the summer. And that was one of the reasons I bumped my cube up from 450 cards to 540 cards, because I wanted to include the artifact package, and it's paid off. I think it's really strong. You want to go into it if you see an Urza. I think if you're planning on casting a Mox Opal, you're almost definitely going to be in blue. I also added the talismans. All of the Jeskai talismans are in, plus blue-black, because I think blue is interested in the talismans, both as mana acceleration to hold up reactive spells, and just because they're mana acceleration for artifacts, which is good. You can play stuff like Kappa Cannoneers, another artifact payoff. So I think the artifact stuff is pretty strong. Something I didn't mention about the cube, because we've only talked about white, is that the graveyard matters a lot. I just really love graveyard synergies. So I've seeded graveyard synergies into every color, with white being the least. And blue definitely takes advantage of the graveyard. Treasure Cruise is really strong in my opinion. You have cards like Abhorrent Oculus, which require you to have looted or fetched away a fetched land or milled a bunch of cards. So this is definitely a little bit of a build around here. A funny little card is Plagon, Lord of the Beach. I'm going to read this one out for the audio listeners, because this is a Jumpstart 25 release that a lot of people would not have heard of. It's 3 mana for a 0/3. When it enters, draw a card for each creature you control with toughness greater than its power, and then has this hybrid white-blue ability to give a creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power this turn. I think this card's actually really strong. There's a couple blue cards like Hard Evidence or Phantasmal Shieldback, which is another Jumpstart card, that are good to curve into it. There's a couple like mana dorks like Noble and Ignoble Hierarch that trigger this on turn 2. If you could draw 2 cards off your Plagon, it really feels like you're doing something. And that toughness ability actually matters a lot more than you think. There's cards like Quantum Riddler, you can turn it into a 6/6, or Urza turns into a 4/4 is something that I've done, which is pretty funny. So I really like this card. I think this card's really fun. The one infinite combo you can get up to in my cube that I'm aware of, there was one more, but it was unintentional, and I think I'll talk about it in black. But Displacer Kitten and Teferi plus a Mox Opal goes infinite. It seems a little niche, but like blue builds around Mox Opal. I think Teferi's just a power outlier high pick in general. And then it's not too hard to like see the Displacer Kitten. And I think Displacer Kitten's pretty good with stuff like Plagon or some of the artifact stuff like Urza. Basically, you have Mox Opal and in your hand, you have Teferi Time Reveler in the battlefield and Displacer Kitten. You cast the Mox Opal, you flicker the Teferi, which means you can activate it again. You bounce the Mox Opal back to your hand, draw a card, and then you can replay the Mox Opal and flicker Teferi again. So you can draw your deck. If you turn on Mox Opal, that's infinite mana. If you're experiencing Cube, you've probably seen this. I know not everyone is. So that's a pretty sweet infinite combo that you can shoot for. I haven't seen anyone do it yet. I got really close. I had Teferi and Displacer Kitten in a really good artifact deck, and then Mox Opal just didn't get opened at the table. You can also do it with Mishra's Bauble or another 0 mana spell. I think Mishra's Bauble is the only one. So that's something to watch out for. I haven't really seen anyone break Displacer Kitten in the cube, so I'm definitely on the lookout for it. Micromancer. This card I think is a little unheralded. I think it's a really sweet card. It goes kind of crazy with Ephemerate. That's really what you want to do with it, is Micromancer, grab Ephemerate. Hopefully it survives, or you do this on 5, and then you Ephemerate, get another spell. Obviously, there's a lot of 1 mana spells that you can get with Micromancer that are just really strong, like Swords to Plowshares or Lightning Bolt. There's a bunch of cheaty cards that you can get too. Like 3 Steps Ahead is a really powerful spell you can get off your Micromancer. So I think this card's really sweet. People like it. I like to play this card a lot. I think it's really cool. I think it should see play in more cubes because I think that toolbox packages are pretty fun. A classic arena cube staple is Torrential Gearhulk. This card's really fun. Obviously, the 2 most powerful things you want to do with it are Magma Opus, which self-discards, or Sublime Epiphany is the classic one because you can copy your Gearhulk and then you get a second trigger, which is just a huge swing. This package is sweet. It goes in most blue decks. You also have Mizzix's Mastery as a way to cast big spells out of your graveyard. This is a red card, but I think it's worth mentioning in this section because you're almost always going to play Mizzix's Mastery in a blue deck. A couple other build arounds. Proph's Eidetic Memory is just one of my favorite cards in the past couple years. It's so much fun in blue tempo decks. Just souping up like your evasive flyers with this, casting like a Treasure Cruise or a Brainstorm, and then putting 3 counters on your creature is so much fun. There's no wheels in my cube to my knowledge, so you can't put 7 counters on something like you can in Vintage Cube, but I still think this card's like really strong, really fun to build around. The last build around card I want to talk about is another recent addition. It's Mystic Sanctuary. This card is banned in Modern. I think this card is actually really strong. It is a mono blue payoff. You need to be running at least like 12 islands to play this. Remember, Shocklands and Surveil Lands are typed, so they work with this. You really want to be playing like a very solid blue core to take advantage of this. This card is an island itself, so it's fetchable, and you can get it off Lorien Revealed, which gives it a lot more utility. So something I really like doing with this card is you play Time Warp. There's 2 Time Warps in the cube. There's Time Warp and Temporal Manipulation, which is just like a functional reprint of Time Warp that we have. So you can take 2 turns with your Mystic Sanctuary, and you can always fetch it if you have a blue fetch land. The other thing that Mystic Sanctuary does specifically is it kind of combos off with Cryptic Command. So you can use the Cryptic Command or return target permanent to its owner's hand mode to pick your Mystic Sanctuary back up, play the Mystic Sanctuary, put Cryptic Command back on your library, and you get a counter or a tap or a draw every single turn with this combo. I've trophied with this. One of my friends also trophied with this. So this is a very real thing to do in this format. And I think that mono blue or like close to mono blue is really strong as well, which I find really fun. All right, time to talk about black. I would describe black as the best color in the cube. I was tallying up all the trophy decks, and black had a pretty sizable lead. Like all the other colors were pretty close. Black was clearly in front, red was clearly in the back. So I do think black is the strongest color in the cube. You know, something has to be the strongest. But yeah, I think it's black here. You can see these first two columns are all the power outliers. And I think that is indicative of why black is so good. It just has a lot of really good cards. To talk through them, there are actually a lot of expensive creatures that I think are really strong in black. But first, the cheap ones. Emperor of Bones, just like, you know, modern staple, just a really good card. We got Barrogoyf recently. I was very hesitant to include this. I was expecting it to be like busted because I think it's a top 50 vintage cube card. It's definitely a top 20 card in the cube, maybe in my cube. But it hasn't shown to be oppressive or unfun. So I kept it. Sephiroth, I think, is a crazy strong card. Works really well with the sack deck and the sack themes. I think this card's pretty sweet. I kind of wish it didn't have the backside just to make the card a little simpler. But I think this card's really strong, pretty fun to play with. Sheoldred the Apocalypse, just a good card. Yawgmoth, another really strong sacrifice card. Overlord of the Baelmerk, the second Overlord on the list. This is another modern staple, works really well with Felia. This card's really strong, though I will say it does kill you really fast. Like mill 4 cards a turn can be a problem if you're not actually like dealing lethal damage with that. But this card's pretty fun. We have Crabomination, which might surprise you. There is a Reanimator theme. I found that Crabomination should be a high pick, and it just fits really well into like mid-range black decks, or even like green-black. Then also Troll of Khazad-dûm on this list. Actual Factual Reanimate is in the cube, so you can turn to a Troll. I have seen numerous games where someone turned to Reanimate Troll and then lose. So I don't think that's out of line. Like I said with Lorien Revealed, I think this is one of the best land cyclers in the cube, and I take it very highly. For the non-creature cards, Fatal Push, just cheap interactions, great. Reanimate might have an argument to be the best card in the cube overall. Haven't totally decided, but it's definitely up there, like in conversation for top 5 cards in the cube. Thoughtseize, cube staple, awesome magic card. Demonic Tutor also is in this cube. Amazing card. Toxic Deluge also is a very unique board wipe that it's so cheap. Also, I would throw Chthonian Nightmare in the Power Outliers category. This card can be a little hard to parse what you're supposed to do with it, but I found most of the times if you just put it in your deck and you have you're like a black creatures deck, you will find really cool stuff to do with it. I think this card's really, really fun. I love having it in the cube. I think it's really cool. It's the only energy card, but it's self-functional, so it definitely deserves the inclusion, and I take this card really highly. Sacrifice is a huge theme in black. And like I've said, I've excluded a lot of explicit sacrifice cards that don't sort of support themselves. So you do have cards like Bloodghast that are like sacrifice fodder, recursive sacrifice fodder. You have sacrifice outlets like Priest of Forgotten Gods or Yawgmoth or Sephiroth that are strong. Most of like the fodder comes from making tokens, usually in white. Marionette Apprentice like Sephiroth is another Blood Artist effect that I think is really strong. You get to play with Phyrexian Tower, which is really fun. War and Soul Trader, another really good sacrifice outlet. I found that, like I've said this a bunch of times, but the Sacrifice Aristocrats deck is usually white-black. You can build red-black, but you have the mana is really good in my cube. So splashing Goblin Bombardment and Mayhem Devil is totally not out of the question in those decks, and you can build a red sacrifice deck as well. I want to talk about Saw in Half. Uh, this card is really fun. It was a very recent addition. There's a lot of uses for it. I think it's really strong in the sack deck where you can copy something like Priest of Forgotten Gods, like getting 2 priests is really powerful. Also just like mid-range black decks where you can copy a crab. And we actually had a scenario come up in a paper draft a few weeks ago where it was a really convoluted situation, but it ended up that one player cast crab and there was one card in the graveyard and it was Saw in Half. And because crab exiles a card from the graveyard, exiles a card from your hand, exiles a card from the top of your library, they could keep sawing in half their crab for free. And Saw would be the only card that goes into the graveyard. So they ended up milling their opponent out with Crabominationing their Saw in Half, like the opponent's Saw in Half. So that was the other infinite combo that has happened in my cube. It involves your opponent playing a specific card, like, so it's not repeatable, but it was a very funny moment. And I just really like playing with Saw in Half. I think this card's really cool. Black aggro is very strong in this cube. I think it's a really good thing to do. You have like cheap threats like Bloodsoaked Champion, Forsaken Miner, which is a combo with Goblin Bombardment too. Cecil is a black 2/3. You have like cheap threat 2-drops like Sunset Saboteur, which is a pretty recent addition that I think is really strong. And then like Rotting Regisaur. Oh, I didn't even mention Dark Ritual is in the cube. So I have face down turn 1 Dark Ritual Rotting Regisaur a couple times. That's a really powerful thing that you can do. Dark Ritual I think is a fun card because there's no like combo applications. So a lot of times you are like powering out a Crabomination or a Regisaur. There's like a little bit of like deck building nuance that you need to actually run Dark Ritual, which in my opinion makes it a fun cube card. You can totally build Black Control. There's Damnation and Toxic Deluge. And then I want to talk about Reanimator, which is one of the stronger things you can do in my cube. So like I said, there's actual factual Reanimate. The other hard reanimation spells are also Necromancy and Persist. Reanimate usually involves blue or red, just because those provide you with a lot of looting. There's no uncastable reanimation targets. I have had people put Itali in their deck when they cannot cast it. But I would say the norm is you're reanimating stuff like Crabomination, Overlord of the Balemerc, or something like Titan of Industry or Vaultborn Tyrant if you're green-black. So Reanimator is definitely real. It's really fun. It's really strong. Definitely watch out for that if you're drafting it. Scavenger's Talent is a pretty sick build around that I added recently. This one looks a little weird. Like you have to level it up to make it seem like it does anything. What you're doing with this is it's a mill win con when you're in a sacrifice deck. It kind of played the exact same role in Bloomburrow, in like Bloomburrow Draft. This is a really sweet thing to shoot for. You just want to like make a lot of tokens. It gives you token fodder if you care about sacrificing permanents in general. It's a really cool card. You just put it into your sacrifice deck. I've seen some like green black or like Jund sacrifice with Scavenger's Talent utilizing the mill on this card. That's really cool too. So yeah, this is a sweet one. And then the last sort of synergy package in black is a small demons package. I don't know what Soren is doing here in the video. This is another card you can build around if you have life gain. There's Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber, which is the Duskmourn room thing that cares about demons. And there's incidentally a lot of demons in the cube. Not a lot, but like there's a handful of demons in black. This card is self-sufficient. It makes a demon for itself. But you can get other synergies with it with Mutavault, which is in the cube, and then some other random demons like Blade of the Oni, which is fetchable off Stoneforge Mystic if you're in black-white, or Archfiend of the Dross, which is one of my favorite cards of the past few years. I think this card's actually really strong if you're in a black aggro deck. Moving on to red. I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I do think that red is the weakest color in the cube. We have empirical data of that, of just it's trophied the least. It's not the worst by much. I think it's fine. It does have some issues with just like how Magic cards are designed these days. Like red doesn't scale as well when the power level's higher. The name of the game with red usually is that it needs to be fast. But red's got great cards still. I think it's totally fine. It's not something to worry about. Like, don't get into red in my cube. In terms of power outliers, a lot of good red creatures. Obviously, Ragavan's great on turn 1. You have a couple of like cube staples. These are all like cube staples you should know. Like Fable. Gut is a recent addition that maybe is too strong, but I did clock that red being like the slightly weakest color. Good to give it a power outlier, especially one that does like die to removal. You have cards like Lelia, Pyrogoyf, which is another card I thought might be too strong and ended up being, really strong, but within the range of the format. Fury, another one. A card that I have on here that's kind of one of my pet cards is Detective's Phoenix. This is something I guess I'll just talk about it now. If you are building like an aggressive or an assertive deck, I find that cards with haste or cards that grant haste are kind of the key. So I wouldn't put Arena of Glory as a power outlier, but these two cards, Arena of Glory and Detective's Phoenix, giving haste to something that maybe has an attack trigger, I find is really, really strong and can catch people out of nowhere quite a bit. So I really love Detective's Phoenix. I take this card really highly. I think some other people might not have it in their top whatever in my cube, but I do think this is a power outlier in my eyes. Some spells, just a couple. Lightning Bolt, obvious. Corey Steel Cutter is a great card for aggressive decks. You don't have to play this in blue-red. It's great in white-red too. It's great in black-red. Just a really strong card. And Goblin Bombardment, which I've mentioned copious amounts of time. For what red is doing, you're usually going to be some sort of an aggressive deck most of the time. You can build slower red decks. You have like just 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop. I have pulled out here just some cards like Screaming Nemesis is really good. Robber of the Rich is really good. I'll talk about Heartfire Hero in a second. I find that the more successful red decks are more assertive mid-range decks. So think the type of deck that is going to play Chandra Torch of Defiance into Glorybringer. That's still a really strong curve in cube. Like I said, haste is really good. I think Glorybringer holds up really well. Red cares about artifacts a decent amount. I've pulled out Legion Extruder here. One of my favorite cards to build around in this cube. It's just really sweet. Not a lot of cards in red that explicitly care about artifacts, but it has a lot of artifacts, as you'll see in the next column with the discard cards. So it's a natural pairing with blue if you think your deck is going to care about artifacts. Which brings me to the discard theme, which nowhere has like just play good cards in your deck to make your synergies work been more apt. So I've mentioned this before, kind of in the intro. There's a lot of cards that care about discard, ranging from Monument to Endurance to Marauding Mako to Inti or Evora. Evora is one of my recent favorite. This card's so cool. And there's just like a lot of good cards in the cube and in Magic that just discard cards naturally and are good. So like Faithless Looting is just a good card. Scrapwork Mutt, Fear of Missing Out, Seasoned Pyromancer, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Also an artifact card like makes treasures. Also a discard outlet, also just a very strong card you'll play in every red deck and take very highly. So Monument Endurance has trophied, it has been successful, and it's off the back of just playing good cards in your deck that discard. You do need like a pretty severe density of those cards for Monument to Endurance to be good. But I have intentionally designed it to sort of force that into this cube. Some other build-arounds. Dreadhorde Arcanist, one of my favorite Magic cards of all time. Lots of great 1-mana spells in every color. You can play this in any color pair except green-red. I don't think has enough. Though there are just a ton of red burn spells for 1 mana that you can play with Arcanist. And if you can get counters on this, which I think is pretty common in green-red, you can play some bigger spells, which I think is worth noting. I love Dreadhorde Arcanist. I take it highly and build it even when I probably shouldn't. Very light synergy, not really a build around. I've been very, very impressed with Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger as Valiant cards There's a lot of things that incidentally target in cubes. So you can target these with Quarry Steel Cutter. You can target these with a card like Detective's Phoenix. There's just like a lot of incidental ways to pump these that I really like thinking about during the draft. Like how can I shift my pick order slightly to buff these cards? Fear of Missing Out, another card that targets. Inti, another card that targets. Just a lot of subtle things you can do with these cards. The last big build around in red is Fires of Invention that I haven't mentioned before. This is a card you'll play in like a big, big stupid mid-range deck, probably a base green deck that's maybe splashing Fires of Invention. The joke with Fires of Invention usually is that you want to play cards with activated abilities. And as soon as I added Fires of Invention back in, which coincided with me adding artifact payoffs, I also added in Retrofitter Foundry, which you can activate all these abilities like with your untapped lands if you're casting things with Fire of Invention. So I think this is a really cool card to build around. Makes you look at cards with activated abilities a lot different. I think it's a sweet one. All right, we're hitting the home stretch. I'm going to talk about green now. In terms of power outliers, standard fare for green decks, you have mana dorks like Birds of Paradise. You also have Ignoble and Noble Hierarch, which in my opinion are just below the power threshold of like power outliers, but still very good cards. You have kind of the Modern Horizons 3 green card brigade of Malevolent Rumble, Fanatic of Veronis, and 6 as really good green cards that also play well with the graveyard, which is I think something that green does really well. You have some recent landfall additions in Bristly Bill and Scythecat Cub. These cards are really strong with fetch lands. If you're in green, you usually really want to prioritize fetch lands for various reasons. These cards are really strong threats coming down early. Another card that plays really well with fetch lands is Ice Till Explorer. This works also with Strip Mine, which is something I was going to talk about in build-arounds, but you can Ice Till Explorer Strip Mine people. I've had it trophy. I've had it also tried to be drafted in flop. So I think it's fairly balanced. I think including a little bit of stupid stuff like this is really fun for a cube. Because cube is such low stakes that like if you get cheesed out of the game with this, I think it's kind of funny. Other good green cards, Overlord of the Hauntwoods, another good green card. I think this card just gives you a lot of value. I think it's a pretty cool card. And Essica's Chariot. This card's just really strong. Gums up the board. Just a strong card. A couple other power outliers that aren't strictly mono green cards, but I wanted to mention them in the green section because I think they play mostly as mono green cards. Wrenn and 6 is another card that works extremely well with fetch lands and Strip Mine for what that's worth. This is a really strong one. Deathrite Shaman also works really well with fetch lands. I think Deathrite Shaman's definitely a top 50 card in the cube. Very, very strong in this environment. And Uro, you can play Uro in this cube. Not much to say about that. It's really good if you have stuff like Malevolent Rumble or Ice Till Explorer to fill your graveyard. For what green is doing, there's sort of 3 big buckets for green. One is a mono green deck. You're usually like mostly mono green, maybe splashing a couple cards of other colors, maybe for removal. You have Riffelos, which was added recently, which is a very strong mono green payoff. Same with Nissa, who shakes the world higher up on the curve. The other option for green is you're more like a fetch land multicolor pile. You're still usually like playing like 9-10 forests, but then a heavier multicolor commitment. And that's kind of the space where like Uro sits in this, or something like Territorial Kavu, more of like a green domain deck. There's also a green beatdown deck, which players don't draft very often, but I've worked hard to support it, and I know that you can do this in this cube. Saj's Chocobo, I think, is a really strong card with fetch lands. Very innocuous 1-drop that I think works really well. And then you just have like cards that care about like big creatures up the curve. Outcaster Trailblazer, sort of these hasty, large 4 and 5 drops like Questing Beast or Balustrade Worm, which I think is a really good card that also plays with the graveyard. And some fight and punch spells that I think are really strong. Primal Might is a sweet card. I love this card. Inscription of Abundance is pretty underrated. Hunter's Talent, I think, is extremely underrated. I think this is like close to a power outlier. This card is absurd. It really like can run away with a game on its own just by playing with like whatever big green creature. Maybe I do think this is a power outlier, actually. I could see it coming up here. Innkeeper's Talent, another good like green beatdown card. Some other build-arounds or like individual synergies in green decks. This little combo of Kishless Skimmer and Molt Tender has proven to be really, really strong for me in my green decks. Molt Tender does not look like a cube level card. I am here to tell you that it absolutely is. You do need to have the green cards that care about the graveyard. So like Ice Till Explorer, Malevolent Rumble. But having a mill outlet, if you have fetch lands and don't care about exiling them, this is just like Birds of Paradise. And Kishless Skimmer is another card that doesn't look cube power level at all. One of my favorite things to do in my whole cube. There are so many ways. It's kind of like Heartfire Hero, where it looks like it's something that you have to explicitly build around. But it turns out there's just like a lot of cards that naturally remove things from your graveyard. Obviously, Molt Tender, you can do it every turn. Stuff like Uro. There's like, if you play cards out of your graveyard with Ice Till Explorer, there's just a lot to do that triggers Kishless Skimmer. I think this card is really underrated and really slept on in cube in general. I used to also have Ketramos in the cube, but after weeks and weeks of absolutely no one even touching Ketramos, I think it's just a little too weak on its own. Like literally just being an enchantment until you get 7 cards in exile is really rough. Kishless Skimmer is a 2-mana 2/2 flyer, which can like pressure planeswalkers, hold off tokens. I think that's a much better baseline. Another fun thing to do in green is to loop Time Warps. Like I said, there's 2 Time Warps in the cube. You have both Eternal Witness and Timeless Witness, as well as Tamiyo, Collector of Tales, has a minus ability to return something from your graveyard to your hand. There is also 1-mana Tamiyo, Modern Horizons 3 Tamiyo. That's one of her planeswalker abilities as well. If you can get these planeswalkers, both of them, out, you can kind of like juggle it. Oh, Jace Vryn's Prodigy is another really strong card that can rebuy a Time Warp. That's a really fun goal to shoot for in a graveyard-based green deck. Another really strong card for graveyard-based green decks is Shifting Woodland. I think this card is probably a little underrated, has some modern pedigree. If you're in these graveyard-based green decks, you can do some really stuff with Shifting Woodlands. I have turned it into Cityscape Leveler numerous times to close out a game. It's just a really strong card for green decks. I think green struggles in a lot of higher powered cubes. I think it's one of the stronger colors in my cube. If I had to be put on the spot with a cube power ranking, I would say it is black 1, and then kind of like blue and green tied for 2nd, and then white and 4th, red and 5th. All right, rounding us out, I'm going to talk about gold cards and colorless cards, both the power outliers and just like a bunch of random cards that are build-arounds or that I want to talk about. Just first off, some power outliers. Teferi, just great. Flage, also, it's Flage. Fallen Shinobi, vintage cube staple, in artifacts, Currency Converter, I think is a really good card for the discard decks. You don't have to be like the red sort of aggressive discard deck to play this card. You can also play it in like blue decks with a lot of looting. I love this card. I think this card's so much fun. Smuggler's Copter, just good. Dismember is a card that I hadn't perceived as very strong. In fact, I thought people were overrating it a lot. And I actually went to cut it. And I showed like my cuts to some of my friends, and a bunch of people went like, oh, don't cut Dismember. I love Dismember. So I don't ever play Dismember, but other people seem to really like it. So I do think I'm convinced by them. I trust them to know that it's really good. So it's on this list as well. A couple lands. Ancient Tomb is a cool one. You have to be careful about where you play this. I think it's at its best in like mono white aggro. You want to be an assertive deck to play this. I've also seen it played really well in a mono green deck as well, where the acceleration could get you to big stuff that gains life to recoup the life lost. I would put Strip Mine in Power Outliers as well. You know, Strip Mine's, I think, best if you can loop it, but also pretty good if you're in an assertive deck that can get on the board quick. A couple other ones. Chrome Mox, I think, is a pretty funny card. It's really good in Vintage Cube when you kind of like a busted start with it. That's a little bit harder in this cube. I think it's at its best when you're so aggressive that the card advantage you lose by playing this doesn't matter, and you kind of play this as a land. Or when you're a blue deck with a ton of card advantage and you can recoup the lost value. So I think this is a really fun inclusion. It's kind of hard to figure out where it fits best, but I do think it's quite strong in those spots. Another random power outlier, Palantir of Orthanc is, I think, quite strong. You need to be aggressive to play it. It's probably a little underrated. If you're like in a white deck, like a white aggro deck, you can get your opponent to like 10 life pretty quickly and slam the Palantir. They have to give you a card every turn, which can really help you push your advantage. So I think this card is quite strong. I don't quite think Mishra's Bauble is a power outlier per se, but I do think it's so good and so ubiquitous that I take it extremely highly. So it's an artifact for the artifact decks. It's a card that puts itself in the graveyard for Delve or for other things like Abhorrent Oculus or Uro. It is a card that sacrifices itself if you care about Mayhem Devil or something. It is a card that draws an additional card for like Mischievous Mystic. It's a 0 for cards like Quarry Steelcutter or Cosmic Grand Zenith. Just does everything. It's really hard to build a deck in my cube that wouldn't play a Mishra's Bauble, which is why I think you should take it really highly in my cube. I would say probably like 3/4 of the decks at each table, maybe even like 7 out of 8 are going to really want a Mishra's Bauble. So I take it very highly. I have actually thought about just putting 5 Mishra's Baubles in the cube because it makes stuff like Cosmic Grand Zenith that much better and is a really unique as a 0. I didn't do it before the CubeCon lists got locked this week, but that's something I'm looking to try in the future. You can do Field of the Dead as a build around. There's Golos as well. Golos fetching Strip Mine can be really good as well. You don't really need to, I'm not going to explain to you how to build around Field of the Dead. This card's just good. Yeah, I think it's the sweet spot of being fun to build around in cube. I want to talk about Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Actually, first, let's just talk about some 3-color cards. There are a couple 3-color cards I really like. I have them here. Rafine, Scheming Seer. I think this card's so cool. Playing like a black-white aggressive deck or like a blue-white tempo deck that like uses Rafine to push damage. You can do some really absurd stuff with Rafine. So don't sleep on this. I think it is worth the splash. Similarly, Satya, Aetherflux Genius, the Jeskai energy card. This card just like works. You want to be in an aggressive deck. There's a couple of other 3-color cards, just as kind of like things you can play, like Corvolds in the cube, I think is really strong for sack decks, splashing green. I like a little bit of 3-color cards in cube that are at least worth the splash and do something fun. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I would include this as a power outlier in my cube. I think this card is really strong, both in the variety of things you can do with it, the variety of decks it can go in. And like I mentioned, so much of my cube cares about the graveyard that having a synergy piece have incidental graveyard hate is really strong as well. So what can you do with Soul Cauldron? I think that the most obvious place to play this in my cube is the sack deck. So you can see Priest of Forgotten Gods and Yawgmoth Thran Physician each have really potent activated abilities. I think that is the most natural home for Soul Cauldron. I think turning everything into Priest or Yawgmoth is really powerful, can really go off. So I kind of treat this as a sack card in some respect. Obviously you can do VV, which is terrorizing standard right now. That's a really strong interaction. You can just basically play the whole VV standard deck in my cube, which I personally find really fun. I think that deck is really fun to play. Also, Grist is the classic combination with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You turn all of your creatures into planeswalkers. Just a really nice pairing. Another card that's a 3-color card that I included here is Loot, the Pathfinder, the Aetherdrift Teamer one with the 3 exhaust abilities. This goes off really hard with Soul Cauldron as well. I think this is a pretty fun hit, and honestly, I think this card is just pretty fun in general. All right, I know this video was pretty long. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around. Like I said, making this video or podcast, however you're listening to it, was mostly a passion project for me. I plan to not make any updates to this cube for about a month. I'm going to take a little bit of a magic break. But I had so much pent up energy and passion and thoughts about this cube that I really wanted to put something out there to sort of tie a bow on this cube and let it sit for a few months and think about other things. If you want to get in on the action of playing this cube, I do have a Discord server where we organize online drafts. It's been really fun. You can just shoot me a message on Discord or Blue Sky or wherever if you want to get in on that server. It's been a blast. Yeah, thanks for watching, and see you later.